to predict the future. And via the motion of the planets, the entrails of animals, or the enigmatic musings of a legendary Renaissance mystic, many people believe we've succeeded.
Nostradamus has one of the greatest track records of prophecy than any other prophet in history.
Were history's most dramatic events foreseen hundreds of years in advance?
We've already seen a huge, devastating storm within the next 2 years is going to hit Northern Europe.
Do the laws of nature really allow us to peer forward in time?
I think predicting the future is a very important task that we're just really bad at doing.
How much is prophecy and how much is plain old probability? We're about to reveal what Nostradamus and his fellow seers really predicted. Salon de Provence in southern France is said to provide a window into tomorrow. 4.5 centuries ago, this was the stomping ground of the world's most famous seer, a Renaissance prophet who, from the attic of his chateau, is said to have foreseen everything from the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon, to World War II and Adolf Hitler, to the moon landing and September the 11th. His name was Michel de Nostradamus, also known as Nostradamus. Today, his name is synonymous with prophecy and prediction. But when Nostradamus roamed these streets, he was already famous as a compassionate physician who treated victims of the plague, as a trusted astrologer who counseled France's kings and queens, and from about 1550 as a prolific writer whose best-selling almanacs netted him a small fortune and whose collection of nearly 1,000 four-line verses called quatrains made him a legend.
Beasts ferocious with hunger will swim across rivers when the German infant obeys no laws. From the human flock, 9 will be sent away. Their fate will be sealed on departure. Earth-shaking fire from the center of the earth will cause the towers around the new city to shake.
Since Nostradamus' Book of Quatrains, The Prophecies, was first published in 1555, it has never ceased to intrigue believers. And, along with the Holy Bible and the works of Shakespeare, it's one of the few books that has never gone out of print. Although he seldom mentions specific dates, names, or occurrences, Nostradamus drew on astrology to foretell events from his own day to the end of time, predicted to arrive in 1999, 3797, or the year 7000, depending on which interpreter you believe. And Nostradamus is nothing if not open to interpretation. Jean-Charles de Fontbrun has been wading through his enigmatic writings for more than 40 years, following in the footsteps of his father, who began 3 decades earlier.
What appears to be gibberish is a language people don't understand. It would be as if I were telling you that Chinese is nonsense, that it doesn't mean a thing. I just don't understand Chinese, that's all.
Whether the mysterious language was a smokescreen to avoid condemnation by the Inquisition, or a clever ploy to ensure he'd never be proved wrong, has been hotly debated ever since Nostradamus first picked up his quill. Fontbrun has read everything from the rise of Napoleon to the fall of the Berlin Wall into the famed seer's words.
I'm sorry, but the results are so numerous that it's statistically significant. It can't just be a coincidence. There are too many precise details.
Using the quatrains as a guide, Fontbrun also incorrectly predicted that the Soviet Union would march on Paris during the 1980s, and that Pope John Paul II would be assassinated in Lyon in 1986, causing mild panic on both occasions. But his enthusiasm for prediction hasn't been dampened.
It's possible to read almost any meaning into Nostradamus' verses that's consistent with the words. It's also possible to read almost any meaning that isn't consistent with the words, but let's forget those.
Peter Le Mesurier, a reformed believer in the prophetic powers of Nostradamus, has written more than half a dozen books on the Renaissance seer. Early on, he did not so much find a window into the future as find himself retrofitting events to match the verses.
So far as I know, no quatrain has ever been correctly interpreted as predicting a future event which then came true. It's always done in the past. Now, any fool can do that.
Throughout history, people have turned to Nostradamus' prophecies for comfort after the tragedy du jour. This was especially true after World War II, when many verses were interpreted to have foretold the rise of Adolf Hitler.
Third estate shall worse than Nero act.
Like quatrain 917.
The furnace they shall once again construct. As shameful king, the age of gold once dead. For Hitler, it is pretty amazing. He calls him the new Nero. And forneron, this is an old French word that means the one who works at the ovens, which is terrible when you think that the ovens were predicted by Nostradamus.
The illusion that Nostradamus used to allude to Hitler was the name Hister, H-I-S-T-E-R.
Victor Baines is president and founder of the Nostradamus Society of America.
It's only one letter off, and to come up with that centuries ahead of time, to me, is just absolutely incredible.
For an even more startling prediction, we fast forward 5 decades to September the 11th, 2001.
And boy, the phone just started ringing. I had 10,000 emails in my inbox. Is this true? Is this true?
Baines thinks there's no question. Quatrain 1072 proves that Nostradamus foresaw the event.
In the year 1999, in the 7th month, from the sky will come the great king of terror. We use the Gregorian calendar today, and our 7th month is July. But when Nostradamus was alive, they used the Julian calendar. So the 7th month was September. 1999 can indeed be a numeric anagram for the actual date of the occurrence, which is 9/11/1. As far as the reference to the great king of terror, that's Osama bin Laden.
Baines believes that although Nostradamus' writings were veiled, his vision of the future was crystal clear. Nostradamus really have Hitler and bin Laden on his mind centuries ago? Could he, or anyone for that matter, really see into the future? Whether or not this skill is actually achievable, the desire seems to be a common one. Every day, millions of people get relationship and career advice from their daily horoscopes. Other fates are cast by the random selection of tarot cards. Long life is read in the palm of a hand, and good fortune in the leaves of a freshly drunk cup of tea.
This is like a bowling ball.
Crystal
It's
balls,
only $100.
candles, coffee grounds, and of course fortune cookies have all been used to give people a glimpse of their future. But fortune telling doesn't just happen on the new age fringes of society. In Paris, experimental physicist Peter Bansal is an analyst for the Global Consciousness Project. This international collaboration of scientists and engineers is trying to discern the mysterious effects masses of people seem to have on this simple probe, called a Random Event Generator, or REG. While Nostradamus called on the planets and stars to glimpse the future, REGs may tap into another mysterious force, the consciousness of humanity. The concept is unusual, but the science behind it is serious.
It's measuring random voltages that are due to quantum tunneling through a diode.
Essentially electronic coin tossers. They measure the randomness of nature by tossing the equivalent of 200 digital coins per second. the group has set up approximately 60 REGs around the world. As one might expect, they throw on average an equal number of heads and tails. But every now and then, something changes this pattern of probability. The Global Consciousness Project is trying to determine if that something is us.
At certain times, there will be an event in the world that magnetizes or draws the attention of many, many people all together, all at one time. And the question that the experiment seeks to look at is whether or not is there at the same time a narrowing of the kind of randomness that we see in the physical data.
The scientists have looked at Princess Diana's funeral in 1997, earthquakes and tsunamis, and New Year's Eve celebrations, events that have drawn worldwide attention. And while the signals are small, they can't ignore slight but unusual variations in the proportion of heads to tails being thrown.
If we could look at events of that nature over and over again, then we could have some confidence, if the signal repeats, that there is some real influence.
This premise has been controversial since the beginning.
I think the deeper problem with the random number generator experiments is that at any given day in the world, something that we would define probably as big is happening. So what would be the baseline by which you could compare a big event versus a non-big event?
While we can't be sure of where the actual baseline is, we can nevertheless identify times when things are certainly unusual, and that's what we try to do.
But since the REGs have been monitored, there has been one spike that has far outweighed all the others. And it occurred on September the 11th, 2001.
This is a picture of the 9/11 data, and there's a large spike that occurs around the time of the actual attacks.
When scientists looked carefully at the data, they saw that the anomalies began about 4 hours before the first plane struck.
Obviously, the consequences of that are enormous, because if such a capability is available, then its use is both practical and fundamental are enormous.
Have we found a way to tap into some collective consciousness that can tell the future? And was Nostradamus doing the same? Nostradamus is said to have written a prophecy a day, every day, for about 3 years. With 942 quatrains, chances are at least a few would have even the skeptics wondering.
An emperor will be born near Italy, who will cost the empire very dearly. They will say when they see his allies that he is less a prince than a butcher. We now know it's about the Emperor Napoleon, because he was born in Corsica, a part of Italy sold later to France. Matches perfectly the event, especially with the fact that because of his bloody military campaigns, some people see him more like a butcher than a prince.
But whether they were prophecy or mere probability, Nostradamus wasn't breaking new ground with his predictions. Predating him by some 2,000 years was the world's oldest fortune-telling technique. It came from China and was called the I Ching, literally meaning the Book of Changes. San Francisco-based Y.C. Sun learned the ancient technique as a boy from his father in Hong Kong.
The I Ching scholar, they try to interpret the energy of the universe. They consider the universe, the earth, the people in it, are part of a system.
It's a system that is constantly changing. And long before computers were digitally tossing coins to tap into these changes, the coins of the I Ching told people how to predict and even control them.
This piece of information really could help people achieve the dream. Sometimes people come to me, they really need some pushing. I will do the pushing for them. And bingo, after 3 months, things are working. They thank me.
For countless generations, just about every culture on Earth has subscribed to some sort of fortune-telling. From Babylon to Egypt to India, what may well have started as a way to predict the best time to plant crops or anticipate the migration of animals somehow morphed into a belief that we could predict the course of our lives. And the belief stuck.
People are keen on predicting the future because it's the biggest unknown in our lives. You never know what's going to happen next. It gives us a sense of security, because in the face of the future we're all insecure.
In the Bible, Joseph interprets the dreams of the Pharaoh to predict when Egypt should store its grains, or else be stricken with famine. The prophet Jeremiah foretells the destruction of the Holy Temple hundreds of years before its fall. The New Testament book of Revelations warns that the world will one day come to an end, and whoever's name is not written in the book of life will be cast into the lake of fire. For nearly 1,000 years at Greece's Oracle of Delphi, priestesses called Pythia would enter a trance-like state, then tell customers of their fates, which were not always favorable. It was the Delphic oracle that told Oedipus he would one day kill his father and marry his mother. Recently, scientists have found a very down-to-earth explanation for the Pythia's wild visions. Intoxicating vapors emanating from fissures in the ground. The Pythias were probably high. Nostradamus himself is said to have drawn on the techniques of Delphi, minus the brain-numbing gases. Jacqueline Allemont directs the Nostradamus Museum, located on the site of the seer's home.
He explains very well how he is working. He says he needs calm and concentration at night. He is alone in his study and has a basin with some water and a lit candle like the Delphic oracle. When he's in this half-conscious state, he has some visions and he writes those visions down.
Divination has also taken on much gorier forms. Animal entrails help decide the location and design of Greece's Parthenon. Homer wrote of Odysseus' use of sacrifice to call on the spirit world and predict future events. The fateful warning to Julius Caesar to beware the Ides of March sprang from the shape and color of a goat's liver. Michael Shermer is the publisher of Skeptic magazine.
The I Ching, reading the tea leaves at the bottom of your cup, the entrails of sheep, it's anything that produces any kind of pattern. And humans by nature are pattern-seeking animals. We're trying to find meaningful patterns in the world to explain it, but not just explain it, also predict it.
300 years after philosophers ushered in the Age of Reason, the number of would-be Nostradamuses has only increased. Edgar Cayce was said to have had accurate visions of the 1929 stock market crash. But he also predicted China's conversion to Christianity by 1968. Astrologer Gene Dixon is commonly believed to have foreseen John F. Kennedy's assassination, as well as the Soviets beating the Americans to the moon, World War III in 1959, and world peace in the year 2000. Psychic detective Noreen Renier supposedly predicted the 1981 assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. But she also said that Jimmy Carter would be gunned down on the White House lawn.
Because people want this stuff to be true, they will spin doctor it to make it true. So in the case of psychics and astrologers, they can get 9 out of 10 things that they say wrong, and the person will come out of the reading saying, wow, it's incredible.
As for the creme de la creme of prophets, his visions may spring from a rather grand repetitive pattern: history. Peter Lemesurier believes that Nostradamus' quatrains are simply reinterpretations of prophecies and events from a long time before.
The whole Renaissance of which Nostradamus was part was based on the idea that ancient classical times were going to be repeated. He took former prophecies or former events, usually from written sources, and assumed that because it had happened once, it was going to happen again.
Nostradamus scholar Patrice Guinard thinks that the seer's real genius was in combining history and the future, and suggests that the medieval equivalent of a typo could have turned a historical reference into a stunning prophecy.
These monuments are among the oldest in Roman culture. As a child, Nostradamus came here often.
A case in point is Quatrain 557, which mentions a distinctive mountain formation and ancient monuments just a few kilometers from Nostradamus' childhood home.
There will go from Mont Gaussier, one who through the hole will warn the army. This is Mont Gaussier, the one mentioned in the quatrain.
Nostradamus might well have been referring to an invasion of Provence 2 decades earlier, which had scouts posted high on Mount Gaussier. But since early printing presses often printed S's as F's, Gaussier was transformed into Goffier, and a bland historical note became a breathtaking reference to technologies as yet unimagined.
The most famous interpretation is in reference to the Montgolfier brothers, who invented the hot air balloon, which of course did not exist during Nostradamus' time. During the 18th century wars, the French armies were informed of the enemy's positions thanks to the Montgolfier balloon.
People have used everything from belly buttons to Swiss cheese to peer into the future. But if there's one divining technique that's trumped them all, it's in the regular movements of planets and stars, the preferred method of Nostradamus himself.
By attaching astrological information to some of his prophecies, Nostradamus was suggesting that he could put a date on all his predictions if asked. I think he was fairly sure that he wouldn't be asked.
Across the globe, millions of people continue to depend on astrology, the suggestion that celestial bodies influence human affairs, to plan their relationships and careers. More professional astrologers study the stars today than do astronomers. Over the centuries, perhaps many politicians and other public figures have used the heavens to make decisions that affect not just themselves, but the whole world. But can objects billions of kilometers away really have any effect on us? In Paris, the spirit of Nostradamus is alive and well in celebrity astrologer Elizabeth Tessier. "400 years after Queen Catherine de' Medici presided over these parts, Tessier was offering celestial advice to another French ruler, President François Mitterrand.
The eternal question was, comment je vais moi et comment va la France? How I am and how is France?
One big issue affecting both Mitterrand and France during his 14 years in office was the build-up to the war against Saddam Hussein. At this time, Tessier says she was a trusted advisor. She recalls a last-ditch peace conference in Geneva.
Mitterrand called me and said to me, Elizabeth, you have to look if this conference will succeed or not. I put on my computer the exact time where the conference had begun. And I said to the president, I think, Mr. President, that they will not understand each other. It will not work. It will not work. And then he spoke to the French people on television, and he said, I just spoke with President Bush. And he said, we are not sure that it will really succeed. I was a little frustrated.
Tessier was so frustrated that she wrote a book about the Mitterrand affair. But she has never been a stranger to stardom. Her astrology column in a popular TV guide is read by millions of people across Europe. She's also written half a dozen astrology books. And in 2001, she caused a mild uproar in France when she earned a PhD from the Sorbonne, the oldest and one of the most prestigious universities in Paris. Her degree on astrology in modern culture was awarded by the sociology department. But Dr. Tessier wants to change that. The Sorbonne stopped teaching astrology back in 1666, and she believes it's high time it came back.
Amazing the complicated structures that try and elevate astrology to the status of a science.
Dr. Robert Massey is an astronomer at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. This site, sliced in two by the prime meridian, welcomed astrological teachings when it was first built in 1675. But several hundred revolutions around the sun seem to have changed that.
The ancient idea of astrology was based on the fact that some of the objects in the sky, the moon, the sun, and the 5 naked eye planets moved whereas everything else in the sky basically kept still. You would look at the sky at the moment of someone's birth, and then you use that to try and make predictions.
Massey concedes that the planets do affect the Earth and the people on it. They exert gravity and reflect sunlight, which is why we can see them. But can they affect our destinies? Mars, at its closest point, is about 80 million kilometers away. If we use closet astrologer Isaac Newton's formula to calculate the red planet's gravitational force on Earth, it equates to about 1/150th the gravity exerted on a baby by the doctor who delivers it.
You know, these influences are negligible. The movement of people around you washes out all the influence of the planets.
And what about the light effects from Mars?
The light of a sunny day, the light of the light that you've got in the room if you're watching this program at home, all of these are at least thousands, in fact at least millions of times brighter than the brightness of any object in the sky.
The 6 lamps over the maternity ward's bed would shine 160 billion times brighter.
Well, if an astrologer argues that the force that influences people on Earth is neither gravity nor light, then what are they left with? You know, I mean, frankly, it must be an undiscovered force.
On this, astronomer Massey and astrologer Tessier agree.
Even the skeptics will accept astrology when we have finer instruments which will be able to measure the micro vibrations in electromagnetism which we emit.
But Massey isn't holding his breath that such a force will be found.
I'm prepared to accept the possibility that there's an undiscovered force that operates between planets and people, but there is no evidence for it, and the logical conclusion is that it doesn't exist.
And of course, there is still one other question to be answered. Whether this mysterious force is with us or not, can astrology really foretell the future?
It doesn't work. It doesn't actually do what it says it can do. Lots of tests have been done on astrology to try to correlate astrological signs with all sorts of different measurable things, and they never find any effects at all.
So why has the belief in astrology persisted for so many thousands of years? The answer may not have very much to do with the stars.
For some people it provides a source of amusement, and for some people a source of comfort perhaps, and that's completely fine. I suspect that the majority of people don't take it that seriously. The ones that do, well, you know, I hope they're not in positions of great influence.
Massey would no doubt have agreed with Julius Caesar 2,000 years ago when he told Brutus, in Shakespeare's words, that the fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. But if this is the case, how do we explain Nostradamus' seemingly astronomical success? Whether his visions of the future were guided by some supernatural power, or whether he was simply transcribing prophecies of old, for people who find solace in his words, the techniques are irrelevant.
My conclusion is that Nostradamus was able to enter the space-time, experiencing at the same time in 1555 events that were past, present, and future. Future for his contemporaries, but not for him.
Perhaps the prophecies make people feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves, instilling in them a greater sense of destiny. This may also explain the attraction felt by tens of thousands of people for Ramtha, the Enlightened One, a 35,000-year-old warrior and conqueror from the mythical continent of Lemuria, said to occupy the body of this 60-year-old woman, JZ Knight.
That takes 10,000 years.
These two have led a symbiotic existence since 1977.
Ramtha, it gives you the greatest compliment going. I mean, when was the last time somebody told you you were a god?
The sale of self-help books and videos and tuition in the Ramtha School of Enlightenment has made it a multi-million-dollar partnership, although it's Ms. Knight who holds the copyright on Ramtha's name, not the other way around. But while one might expect a 35,000-year-old man to be able to tell us a lot about our past, perhaps even about the Cro-Magnons who would have lived during Ramtha's time, he also claims to know about the future. So what does Ramtha think the future has in store? Thanks to our overuse of fossil fuels, the answer is nothing good. It's a doom and gloom prophecy to rival those of Nostradamus.
I have already seen a huge, devastating storm. The next 2 years is going to hit Northern Europe. Its cold is going to linger. You're going to see hurricanes of enormous proportions coming off of Africa. We have things that will affect global economy on a massive scale. And that is only going to get worse.
Unlike Nostradamus, though, Ramtha's prophecy comes with a happy ending.
People are going to survive this. There'll be massive die-off, but people are going to survive this in numbers much greater than they ever did before. Smart people will finally come to power, and that we can look forward to.
Our desire to predict the future has existed throughout recorded history. And while many fortune-telling methods remain on the fringes of society, prediction today is also mainstream, involving serious science and big business.
In these modern, sophisticated time of computers and Blackberries and spacecraft, scratch the surface of an ordinary man on the street. We are not so different than our ancestors of thousands of years ago.
The dream of Nostradamus lives on in London, in Martin Raymond and Chris Sanderson, co-founders of a British think tank aptly called the Future Laboratory.
If there is a rainstorm upstream, there will be a flood downstream. And I think really that's how good forecasters work.
They tap into the minds of some 2,500 diverse individuals from around the world, fashion designers, gamers and scientists, and predict future trends for companies like BMW, Samsung and L'Oreal, to name a few.
We have a network of people who are our eyes and ears, who are looking, searching, thinking, asking.
And our job often is to just start putting the pieces together. It isn't rocket science, but neither is it sort of casting stones into the air and then looking at how they fall. If you just look hard enough, you will find pockets of the future wherever you choose to go.
The Future Laboratory looks for these pockets in unexpected places. A new fast food burger, a trend towards recycled wood in the furniture industry, or a rap star who trades baggy jeans for a shirt and tie.
So all of these things, although they seem trivial, are tiny indicators of how even something that's about music is beginning to reflect the bigger issues in culture about responsibility.
These cultural clues can then be translated into tangible business strategies, leading to the development of mobile phones that double as credit cards, websites that push romance rather than porn, or edible cosmetics and nutraceutical skin treatments.
It's no surprise that you've now got cosmetic companies that are talking about, drastic results.
Spotting trends for the cosmetic industry is one thing, but has the advancement of science and technology really made it possible to read tea leaves on a global basis and better predict what is coming 5, 10 or even 20 years down the line?
If you're going to actually look into your own future, it's the wrong question to say, what will happen? The right question is, what may happen? Then you can make sensible decisions.
Paul Sappho directs the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, California, where forward thinking has been on the agenda for decades.
In the 1950s, the first blush of the computer revolution, scientists all thought if we just put enough data into the machine, we can get the answers. That works in some very narrow areas like weather forecasting. It does not work in society.
In fact, with technology advancing at such a fast pace, predicting what tomorrow holds is more challenging than ever, even for the experts. There are many examples of prediction gone bad. British scientist Lord Kelvin declared, heavier-than-air flying machines are impossible, less than a decade before the Wright brothers took off. A Yale economist asserted in 1929 that stocks have reached a permanently high plateau, a week before the market crashed. In 1943, the IBM chairman claimed that there was only a market for about 5 computers in the world. And Bill Gates announced in 1981 that 640K ought to be enough for anybody. It was loose-lipped, failed predictions that led futurist Stuart Brand to launch the Long Bets website, where people can not only offer up their vision of the future, they can also bet cold hard cash on it. Whether it's a run-in with ET by the year 2050, a 150-year-old human by the middle of the next century, or the discovery of Bigfoot in the next 2 decades. By writing predictions down in specific, verifiable and accountable terms, we may one day learn how to get them right.
You don't learn a damn thing about anybody's predictions if you don't actually close the loop, get the feedback, was it right or was it wrong?
Back in Paris, physicist Peter Bansal, armed with data from his random event generators, is still betting that human consciousness pooled during major world events like Princess Diana's funeral plays some role in determining the random coin tosses of nature. On September the 11th, 2001, REGs around the world registered their largest signal fluctuations ever.
The blue lines here show when the planes were actually slamming into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon.
And when scientists examined exactly when the fluctuations began, they started at 0400 Eastern Time, more than 4 hours before the world's attention was fixed on New York. As to why this happened, Bansal is cautious.
Perhaps there could be some inkling of a bubbling happening before what we conventionally call the beginning of an event.
But others have offered more mystical explanations. Some say the tiny probes were picking up on the premonitions that many people around the world claim to have had before the plane struck.
Yeah, okay, well, it'd be nice if in the future they could let us know about this ahead of time. Isn't that a violation of national security? Shouldn't they be in jail? Shouldn't they be telling us when the next strike is going to come?
With notions of predicting the future, premonition, could the data predict something terrible before it were to happen? That needs to be an open question. I am certainly motivated to look further by the possibility that that could happen.
If a wiggle in collective consciousness in the minutes before a disaster seems unlikely, how could someone have predicted 9/11 400 years ago, as Nostradamus fans insist? More than 400 years after his death, it's difficult to separate Nostradamus the man from the legend.
One day he was walking down the road through a village in France, and he came upon a young Catholic friar. And he suddenly fell at the feet of the young friar and kissed his robes and pronounced him Pope. As it turned out, about 20 or 30 years later, that young friar became Pope Sextus V. During the plague, Nostradamus used what was a pill that contained rose petals and some other various herbs, and it helped to boost the people's immune system so they could fight off disease. Supposedly it worked.
None of these stories can be confirmed historically, but that doesn't stop the thousands of believers who come to Ceylon's Catholic Church each year to gaze at Nostradamus's tomb. Father Michel Desplanches is the head priest.
People stay sometimes here for hours with a strange look in their eyes, and they say, I try to feel the waves from the bones of Nostradamus. It's a bit frightening, but here it's the house of God, so we appreciate they come.
After the plane struck on September the 11th, 2001, Nostradamus was called upon again. Web searches for the seer's name skyrocketed. On September the 12th, there were 4 times as many searches for Nostradamus as there were for Osama bin Laden.
But as soon as a bad thing happens, people start looking through Nostradamus to understand why. Could I have predicted this? How can I understand this?
Stanford Business School professor Chip Heath investigates why ideas, frequently bad ones, survive and propagate in the world. After 9/11, he and an undergraduate student, Mazia Yuffa, set out to understand the perpetual attraction to Nostradamus. They conducted an experiment to determine whether particular quatrains could equally prophesize two very different events, occurring more than half a century apart: 9/11 and the London Blitz, both of which took place in major cities and burned dramatic, vivid images into people's minds.
And if a student in a journalism class wrote a report that was equally applicable to the World Trade Center and the London Blitz, you'd give that student an F. And so if the same prophecies are applicable to very different disasters, then Nostradamus is not capturing something true and prophetic about these events.
The pair searched Nostradamus's 942 quatrains for prophecies containing both the words city and fire, and got 11 hits. They stuck them onto two different questionnaires, one asking if Nostradamus has predicted 9/11, and the other the Blitz. Then Yuffa went off to the dorms.
Essentially, I walked around all of campus, knocking on people's doors. These were all written by Nostradamus in 1555. One for you. Take your time whenever you're done. Some had heard of Nostradamus, some had never heard of him. No, never heard of him before. Earth-shaking fire from the center of the earth will cause tremors around the new city. Do you guys have 2 minutes to take a quick survey? Sure. Two great rocks will war for a long time. Then Arethusa will write a new river. I think maybe. That's a maybe? Maybe. Okay.
Brilliant about what Nostradamus is doing is he's being very concrete. He's painting a picture of what's going on. So if I imagine the two great rocks warring for a long time, I can imagine the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. It's like, wow, Nostradamus nailed it. They're the two great rocks. On the other hand, if I'm picturing the London Blitz, the two great rocks are still calling up a visual image, but instead it's the army of Great Britain and the army of Germany facing off against the English Channel.
So did Nostradamus predict the 9/11 attacks?
Sure enough, about a third of the time people said, yeah, he did.
He came close.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What about the Blitz?
Sure enough, they said, wow, you know, I think he did predict the London Blitz.
Again, about 30% said yes. Even after Heath and Yuffa scrambled Nostradamus's words, they continued to have the same effect.
That's a sign, again, of his abilities as a poet. If you can apply it at one point in time and say, oh, he nailed this event, but then it applies at another point in time and you say, oh, he's nailed this event, that's great poetry. Not great prophecy.
Heath suggests a 3-step program for becoming the next Nostradamus.
One is to write a lot. You know, start writing today, write one a day for the next 3 years. Focus on the negative. People only want to look for prophecy to understand when something has gone wrong. Be as concrete as you can, but in an ambiguous way. So talk about broken bodies, talk about, you know, two great rocks, talk about war, talk about death and destruction, but leave a little ambiguity.
But can concrete imagery and ambiguity explain all of Nostradamus's greatest hits?
In my mind, that's the most lamest explanation of Nostradamus' quatrains I've ever heard in my life. And I don't believe anyone who would be that lame to make that assessment.
There is certainly nothing ambiguous about Hister.
This really gets the nutters straight away. Hister was the ancient name for the lower Danube, and the Danube and the Rhine formed the former northeastern border of the Roman Empire. So if the Rhine is a river, the probability is that Hister is a river. But then, of course, the nutters say, but he was born quite close to the Danube, and so it goes on. You can't win.
And what about the numerical anagram for 9/11/2001?
He's not even inviting you to play with the figures. It is all in clear words. The year, 1,999 and 7 months. So you can fiddle with figures and add one and take one off and multiply by the number you first thought of, but it'll be your doing, not his.
No matter what the quatrains actually say, Nostradamus's critics claim that people can find whatever meaning they like in them, and often give him the benefit of the doubt.
His success rate was something like 5.73%, which is a good deal worse than chance. I can do better than that, and that doesn't mean to say I'm a prophet.
At the end of the day, prediction is a complex business.
Talk to quantum physicists. They think uncertainty is built into the very fabric of the universe. And above all, it's uncertain because our acts in the present affect outcomes ahead. And I don't care if you have a crystal ball or you're looking at sheep entrails. There is no way to know.
Economists have missed massive stock market crashes. Political scholars didn't predict the Soviet Union's fall a year before its collapse. Nobody foretold the rise of the internet. And meteorologists still can't give us an accurate weather forecast more than a week or so in advance.
What possibility does a guy from 4 centuries ago have in knowing what's going to happen today when our best experts have no clue what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks?
Throughout history, people have tried desperately to get a glimpse of tomorrow.
Obviously, people do make predictions ahead of time, but nobody ever comes up and really gives us a pat on the back for being successful.
And although the results are often no better than chance, the fascination with prediction prevails.
It just seems to be built into us as a species to look ahead, whether it's over the next hill or the next year or the next 10,000 years. It's in our nature.
It's an understandable fascination, because whether we can predict it or not, the future is exactly where we're headed.